Was the largest steel mill west of the Mississippi River, and CF&I was the largest private employer in Colorado, the largest private landowner. CF&I drove industry in the West and certainly within the state of Colorado.
In the late 19th century, the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company made history at the labor rights frontier. CF&I controlled their immigrants for quite a long time until the Ludlow Massacre occurred. Since many of the workers felt that they were getting treated in a terrible way and their wages very low for the work that they were doing, the living conditions were company townhouses, and back then they were common but definitely not luxurious. With these living conditions, many of the workers revolted back at John Davidson Rockefeller, who was the founder and builder of the Pueblo Steel Mill. Since Rockefeller had too much backlash, he had to make a plan to save his workers from leaving. The plan was to raise the workers' wage and have shorter hours. The plan ended up inspiring many other industries and it pioneered through the East. Although Rockefeller did not fully make up the plan himself, it was William Lyon Mackenzie King, who was a former Canadian Minister of Labor. With him helping Rockefeller, the mill was saved and it went on to become the best Western steel mill in the West. The mill had many important people throughout its history, including William Jackson Palmer, John D. Rockefeller Jr., and John C. Osgood. John D. Rockefeller Jr. was the son of J.D. Rockefeller, who was not as recognized as his father was. He was very antisocial and very self-centered. He did not play a huge role in the beginning of the steel mill's industry. He started to become a big role when he thought of most business problems that no one thought of. One of these problems was the labor question about making workers accept the difficult circumstances created by industrialization. Other than this, he did not play a huge role, but did play a mildly crucial one. Another person was William Jackson Palmer. He helped the rail business during the beginning of the Pueblo Steel Mill. His main role was a business manager, and he was very good at what he did. Another person was John Davidson Rockefeller, the owner of the Pueblo Steel Mill, and who was the biggest person in the mill's history. He brought up the mill all the way from the ground up, but with him earning millions of dollars, there came a price, and in 1914, he was brought down to one last leg.
There were so many ways to die in a coal mine. There were explosions, gas buildup. Coal secretes, as part of its decaying process, methane gas, an explosive in a mine. Miners produced clouds of coal dust, which not only settled in their lungs, slowly suffocating them, but also created an accelerant that would ignite the methane gas. In 1910 alone, more than 400 miners died in Colorado, 210 of them in 3 separate explosions. The vast majority of miners died in ones or twos, and in rock falls and in small accidents.
A mule counted for more than a miner because it was tougher usually to replace a good mule than a miner. There was no shortage of people looking.
Rockefeller had planned the ERP, which was a plan to keep his workers in check with the company. When Ludlow happened, the camping plants were forced into severe position. The immigrants were angry that they couldn't use the money anywhere outside the area. Since they were not able to use money anywhere else, they decided to change that as well, and went on to have another reason to retaliate against Rockefeller. This also made camping plants, which were used quite often back then, because it helped the workers stay in the premises. They worked for around 5 years until the Ludlow Massacre hit and they were shut down.
When the immigrants realized that labor rights did apply to them, they started to get smart. In the next 5 years, camping plants started to fade, which then aroused the ERP. Some of the labor rights they had were they couldn't be treated like slaves and could potentially get a higher pay. Since many of the workers were unhappy that they couldn't do much outside the companies, they were not happy, and this led to everything that happened. Labor rights were such a big deal because Rockefeller made the ERP, and that changed minds of huge business workers in the United States. It also started some movements in the East. The plan was simple but inspired many. This is how Rockefeller and his steel mill became a great frontier in the American West history.
The Pueblo Steel Mill was most definitely a frontier in labor rights in Pueblo, Colorado, as immigrant workers were constantly discriminated against. The mill had brought in a massive community, making it well known very quickly. The mill had brought in many cultures and religions, which is why Pueblo has so many people with mixed culture and religion. With many people, it was also a better and cheaper way to produce steel. It was made because the Rio Grande was dominating in railways. So the mill partnered up with Colorado Fuel and Iron Company, or CF&I, to make it cheaper and faster.
The mill was built in Pueblo because it incorporated vertical integration using resources from the start to the finished product. It is safe to say that the Pueblo Steel Mill brought in people, made lives easier for transportation, and made Pueblo. The mill didn't have the best housing and rights though. There was a strike called the Ludlow Massacre. This almost brought the destruction of the mill in 1914 because of low wages for hard work.
The reason he did the plan was that those workers had embarrassed him. by striking and publicizing how difficult their conditions were. So the plan was an attempt to improve their conditions without bothering to recognize the union that they wanted, the United Mine Workers.
It was saved by Rockefeller with his plan, which was to pay the workers more money and upgrade their housing. It also helped clear up the corruption of Ludlow. Rockefeller managed to keep a steady income and his workers were happier. Even though the mill had ups and downs, it pulled through, making life okay for the immigrants once again to propel the mill back into business.
Once the plan was released, there had to be a vote on it. The plan was finally passed. Lots of workers, especially the skilled ones, appreciated the plan. It finally gave them the opportunity to voice their complaints as a gateway for the delivery of the company's renewed efforts at welfare capitalism. For the not-so-skilled workers, which were mainly immigrants, the plan didn't help as much since they didn't understand English, so they really didn't know they had a chance to have rights in general. As the plan carried on and could really be discussed among the workers, the recognized plan offered a way for them to voice their opinion on whatever grievances they had. The problem then became Pandora's box of the plan that offered the employees or what was providing to them. Even though the management bore the entire cost of the operations plan, opponents of the plan claimed the ERP was an inadequate representation and didn't really take action to fix some of the grievances of the workers. The ERP was a unique alternative as a company union, as some of the unions in the 19th century were viewed as not responsible. Some of the unions, such as the UMWA and the IWW, they both offered different benefits, but they supported the same cause, helping fight for workers' safety and rights. The UMWA was formed in 1890 to fight for better pay and better working conditions for the National's coal miners.
IWW, however, was not as successful as the UMWA. The IWW, Industrial Workers of the World, was founded in Chicago in 1905 as an explicitly anarchist socialist alternative to the major labor unions of the time, which the IWW's leaders deemed conservative. They had a decline as early as 1927, with their last major strike being in 1927. The Rockefeller ERP ran for almost 20 years and impacted not just Pueblo's steel mill plant, but the other labor right movements across the country. According to Scamelhorn, as a substitute for independent unions, it is widely adopted, particularly by iron, steel, and railroad enterprises.
The ERP went from an experiment to a success. The Rockefeller plan was also not limited to influencing just American industrial companies. It had considerable influence in Canada and industrial relationships in the United Kingdom, Japan, Germany, and Australia. According to Dr. Rees, unfortunately, Rockefeller Jr. would divert his energy towards other activities and pay little attention to the CF&I. Eventually, the steel mill would create a union. In 1942, the Rockefeller plan was ruled invalidated by the National War Labor Board under the National Labor Relationships Act of 1935 as an illegal company union.
Rockefeller was sort of your typical indifferent industrialist before the massacre happened. He essentially told the people who ran CF&I to do what they had to in order to get rid of the union. When the massacre happened, he took an enormous amount of bad press. Upton Sinclair, the author, for instance, created a mock trial in his hometown trying to pin the murders on John D. Rockefeller Jr. And he responded to that by starting really the first important company union in the United States, a union that was controlled by management rather than labor. While a company union is not as good as a real independent union, it was an improvement over the conditions they had before. And because of that, a lot of workers responded well.
Even though the mill had some ups and downs, they managed to pull through. Many of the workers were fine at first until they realized they had labor rights. If the mill had not hired Lamet and Bowers, then they may have had an almost problem-free place. But because they did, the workers had to be addressed. The ERP plan was made. When the mill had its final points, it became the best steel mill in the West. Many of the people were finally a little more happy with the life that they had been subject to.